Can you share a little bit about your personal background and how you arrived at your current work with the brand narrative and AI? My personal background: grew up in the UK, went to Liverpool University, became a musician at Liverpool University in my spare time, singing in a blues band called Stanley the Counting Horse. That was really lovely. I played the Cavern Club where the Beatles played. And in fact, I went to the same university as John Lennon, although obviously not at the same time. I then moved to Paris and joined a punk folk band playing music in the street. I played the double bass. I was also a singer. That was delightful. The band was called The Barking Dogs. And for 10 years, we toured around Europe. We released 4 albums. We played in front of probably 150,000 people. And it was a professional career. So I was a professional punk folk double bass player and singer. Then I created a website for children with my ex-wife, Veronique Barnard. The site was called Boowa and Kwala, with 2 characters called Boowa and Kwala, Boowa, blue dog, and Kwala, a yellow koala. That was a huge success. We ended up in 2007 with 1 billion page views and 60 million visits, and we were competing with websites like Disney, PBS, and the BBC. In that work, one of the reasons we were so successful was because I focused on Google as a search engine to bring us a lot of traffic, but I also used branded marketing. Boowa and Kwala became an incredibly powerful brand by addressing the right audience, which is babysitters, schools, parents, grandparents, who would then introduce Boowa and Kwala to the children. And then the children would become very enthusiastic about Boowa and Kwala. Let's look at that now as a brand. And it's a brand with an immense amount of personal, emotional attraction. And that's what powered Boowa and Kwala. Boowa and Kwala, the website, got bigger and bigger. We ended up with 1,000 games, but also more and more children who would visit. And as I said, peaking at 60 million with 1 billion page views. And that's because of the very, very strong brand attachment. Then in 2011, I exited Up to 10, which was the company that owned Boowa and Kwala. And I decided to pivot to digital marketing and entrepreneurship, and realized that when I was pitching to clients and investors, I was losing a lot of deals. I lost hundreds of thousands of dollars because I would convince somebody in a meeting, leave my business card, and then as I left the meeting, they would put the business card on the table and Google my name. And when they Googled my name, it said Jason Barnard is the voice over artist for Boowa the blue dog in a cartoon for children. And that lost me all the credibility and authority that I had built up face-to-face in the meeting. So I realized quickly that I needed to change the narrative that Google was showing about me. I used my skills that I had learned building Boowa and Kwala to be this huge international success, competing with Disney, PBS, and so on and so forth, to change Google's perception of me so that it presented me primarily as a digital marketer and an entrepreneur, and secondarily as the voice of Boowa the blue dog. And that worked incredibly well because business rolled in, because people would search my name and they would see Google telling them Jason Barnard is an authority in digital marketing and he's a successful entrepreneur with 2 businesses behind him, 2 profitable businesses behind him. And I had the big knowledge panel at the top, and that's Google's stamp of approval. So they would be using Google to research me because they trust Google. Google would then say, this person has a knowledge panel and is an authority on digital marketing and a successful entrepreneur. And by the way, he was a cartoon blue dog and he was a musician. And that meant that people would see the brand narrative that I wanted them to see. And I was recommended, in effect, by Google. Then I created Kalicube because I realized that this is a hugely helpful service for any person. If you're an author, if you're an actor, if you're any kind of public figure, what Google says about you when somebody Googles your name is phenomenally important. If you're in business, it's bottom of the funnel. People who are searching your name are thinking about doing business with you in one way or another. So I created Kalicube and I started building up a data set, which is now 3 billion data points, the biggest independently held data set of brand signals from Google and AI. And I built algorithms that go through the data and figure out where Google, and indeed now AI, is getting the information that it uses to represent and to decide how to represent an individual or a company. And Kalicube has been hugely successful. In the last 4 years, we've six-folded our income revenue, helping primarily entrepreneurs, business leaders, to ensure that Google and AI show the version of them that they want, their brand narrative. So what was great about that was that I learned to change Google's perspective of me. Then I helped entrepreneurs, business leaders change Google's perception of them so that the bottom of funnel audience was seeing the brand narrative they wanted with Google's stamp of approval as a bonus. And as it turns out, because AI, like ChatGPT, Perplexity, Copilot, and so on and so forth, use the same data set as Google search, i.e. the web, the system I invented works for all of them. Bing search, Google search, ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Perplexity, and every time any of these new engines come out, such as DeepSeek, they have always got my brand narrative as I want it, because they're using fundamentally the same data source, the web. I control my digital footprint, therefore I control what they understand about me. That is power in the digital age. How does your experience in children's education influence your approach to educating machines? That's a great question. I've been talking about educating Google like it's a child. It's a child that wants to understand the entire world, including you and me and everybody else and every company and every product. And if you look at, for example, Google Maps, that's understanding the world physically with the shops, the streets, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't yet understand the people and the companies and what we're doing. But that's what it's trying to do with the knowledge graph. And the knowledge graph is a massive encyclopedia that is used by their algorithms. So it's a machine-readable encyclopedia like Wikipedia, but tens of thousands of times bigger. Right now, in 2025, it's got about 54 billion people, corporations, products, things in it. And it's got about 1,000 billion facts. So if you look at it from the perspective of saying, well, this child wants to fill up its encyclopedia with everything in the entire universe or world, and we have the ability to teach it, to educate it. We can educate it about the small corner of our world. The small corner of the internet that is our world. And when we were creating the games and educational games for Boowa and Kwala, it was all about showing the child the world and explaining it very clearly in a way that they could understand, in a way that the child would be able to associate something new with something they already had in their understanding. And that's what we do with Google and AI. We present them with new information in a very clear manner, and we link it, associate it with something that it already knows, because that's how human beings learn. So Google and AI are children who want to understand the world, and your role is to help them to understand your particular brand narrative. Your little corner of the internet needs to be optimized to educate Google and AI, much like you would educate a child. How do you see control of brand narrative impacting humanity in the AI era? Controlling brand narrative is fundamental. I would say it's existential. How Google and AI understand you is fundamentally important to everything in the modern digital era. In terms of, if you look at Google, that was just me or users going to Google, asking a question and getting a list of options with hopefully the best option at the top. That was Google's aim. Now with AI assistive engines such as ChatGPT, Perplexity, Google Gemini, Microsoft Copilot, we have a situation where the person is having a conversation with the machine. So the machine is now able to introduce new ideas, new topics, people, corporations into the conversation. And how they do that depends on how well they've understood your brand narrative, what you do, who you serve, why you're the best. But it goes further than that. Because as AI gets integrated into more and more of our day-to-day lives, that opportunity for the machines to introduce a person or a corporation, you or your company, to the conversation it's having with its user increases. And a really good example of that would be Gemini integrated into Google Docs or Copilot integrated into Windows, where the machine could potentially push information, push suggestions to the user. And if I'm writing a Google Doc about knowledge panels, if somebody else is writing a Google Doc about knowledge panels, Google Gemini could potentially push a piece of my content to them to say, this piece of content by Jason Barnard, who is the world expert in knowledge panels, is potentially helpful to you. That is me as a brand, personal brand, being pushed into somebody's world by the AI, in this case, Gemini, without them asking. So you have three different levels. You have search, where the user is asking specifically for information and my brand narrative needs to be accurately reflected in there. You have AI assistive engines, where the conversation between the user and the machine has the potential of introducing me or my company, Kalicube, into that conversation. And then you have the AI integrated into software and even hardware with Microsoft PCs, Copilot PCs, where not only is the conversation going on potentially, but there is a push opportunity where my brand could be introduced to a conversation where the machine starts the conversation. And that's a huge, huge, huge difference. So being understood by the machine for who you are, what you do, who you serve, being seen and believed to be the most credible solution for a specific problem where you can actually help the user by that machine, and having the content that allows the machine to suggest your specific content that will help the user is the key to the future of AI. My brand narrative in Google, AI, ChatGPT, Copilot, Perplexity is fundamentally important to my business. What role did your background in statistical analysis and economics play in your current methodologies? I studied economics and statistical analysis in Liverpool at Liverpool John Moores University. Statistical analysis at the time, this was 1998, was the beginnings of computers with still the green lines on the screen. But my biggest strength was being able to look at huge data sets and be able to see patterns and be able to see what was illogical or didn't make sense from what had been extrapolated from the data. And it's proven to be incredibly useful in Kalicube. With 3 billion data points, we have this immense amount of data, but one of the biggest problems when you've got that kind of amount of data is no one person understands how it was collected and what you have in there. So if you take a company like SEMrush, who has thousands of billions of trillions of data points, when somebody's querying that database, they don't really know what's in there and they don't know how it's all been built. And with Kalicube, with our our huge data set of brand signals from Google and AI collected over 10 years is that I collected it and I organized a relational database. So I understand exactly how it all fits together. I know the data is absolutely clean. And if when numbers come out of it through a query that I might make, I can tell you immediately whether or not that number makes sense, given my knowledge of what's already in the database. And I've had experience with SEMrush, for example, where I've asked them for data. They've given me the data, and it obviously doesn't make sense. What their data is saying, and it is obviously not true. And one of them was 40% of SERPs have image boxes. 40% of Google search engine results pages have image boxes, and that is very obviously not true. The problem we found at the end of the day was that the person querying the database hadn't specified that he was only asking for page 1. So it was giving him the 10 pages. So the actual information was within the first 10 pages of Google search results, 40% have image boxes, and that was true. But I had asked for only page 1. So when it comes down to it, there's the difference, or the fact that one person or one group of people have collected the data, another group of people are querying the data, and another group of people are using that data, means that there's a disconnect between collection, analysis, use. And at Kalicube, with our 3 billion data points, and my background in statistical analysis, I do all three. So there is no disconnect. So I would argue that Kalicube's data is more reliable primarily because the same person has collected, analyzed, and uses. Can you explain the process you've developed from gathering 3 billion data points about search and assistive engines? Yes, we've called it the Kalicube Process, and it's a process of understandability, credibility, deliverability. Understandability. How can we make sure the machines, Google, ChatGPT, Gemini, understand who you are, what you do, and who you serve? And those 3 billion data points allow us to see where these machines are getting their facts from. And very importantly, for each individual person, corporation, product, music album, each thing, the trusted sources will be different. And our data clearly shows that you can be an absolute authority on a particular topic when you're not generally perceived to be an authority. And an example of that would be, I am the absolute authority today for information about the Barking Dogs, my music group, and Boowa and Kwala. And I am more authoritative than, for example, Music Brains, which is a generalist music site. Music Brains, generally speaking, would be seen to be much more authoritative than I am. IMDb, much more authoritative than I am in a general sense, but specifically for the Barking Dogs and for Boowa and Kwala, Jason Barnard is more authoritative than those websites. Our data clearly shows it, and we can actually identify where Google and AI are getting information and which ones they considered to be authoritative. In the Google leak from last 2024, they talk about is reference page. And that's what we can find at Kalicube in our data, that a specific page is used as a reference for knowledge, understanding by Google's algorithms. Then credibility. How do we demonstrate to the machine that we are credible for the users that we say that we serve? And that's no longer just links. It used to be links. Links still count, but links are all about popularity and probability. Credibility for a person, you can add to links to their personal website things like awards, people they know, people they've worked with, companies they've worked for, companies they've worked with or at, academic papers they've published, books they've published, websites that they've published on, but not so much the websites, but actually the entity behind the website. So, for example, Forbes.com is brilliant because Forbes is already a brand in and of itself, and Forbes.com is very clearly just an online representation of that brand. Every website is just a representation of the brand, the company behind it. So that credibility needs to be built up. And once again, at Kalicube, with our data set, we can identify what are the sources that we should be leveraging to demonstrate credibility. And credibility actually starts by saying that you are credible and proving why what you're saying is true. So, for example, I am an expert in knowledge panels, and I can prove that by showing you a lot of articles published on respected media outlets such as Search Engine Journal, Search Engine Land, Forbes, Entrepreneur, talking about knowledge panels. All the podcasts I've been on, the podcast host is implicitly vouching for my expertise when they publish a podcast where I'm speaking about knowledge panels. I've published a book about knowledge panels. All of that goes towards my credibility as a knowledge panel expert. And lastly, deliverability. If they've understood who you are, what you do, who you serve, and that you're the most credible solution, the machines need to then have the content from you to be able to deliver you to the subset of their users who are your audience. So you need to publish videos, audio, images, text that allows them to cite you and quote you and present you to the subset of their users who are your audience. So that's understandability, credibility, deliverability, and that is the Kalicube process. And it's a future-proof, universal digital marketing strategy. What is the difference between search engines and assistive engines in your view? Well, a search engine is when the user goes in and searches for something specifically and explicitly and is given a list of options, and they choose the option they want. So Google search is an example, Microsoft Bing search is another example, DuckDuckGo is a third example. And then an assistive engine is an engine that will assist me to get to the solution to my problem. So with ChatGPT, for example, I'm having a conversation. I will initiate the conversation and it will give me options of follow-up ideas of what I might want to know next or which direction our conversation might be taking. So it's assisting me to find the best solution to my problem. And whether it's a search engine or an assistive engine, the aim is the same. I have a problem. I want to find the best possible solution. With the search engine, I have to be active all the way down the funnel. With an assistive engine, the engine guides me down the funnel in a conversation to find the best solution. How does your concept of the marketing funnel apply inside these assistive engines like ChatGPT, Bing Copilot, and Perplexity? I actually did a video the other day about buying some musical equipment using ChatGPT to guide me. So the funnel is awareness, consideration, and decision. My awareness stage was I need to solve a particular problem, which is, in my case, can I play a guitar through my bass amp? So I asked ChatGPT, very top of the funnel, very general, can I do it? Or will I break the bass amp? ChatGPT said there's no danger of breaking your bass amp. That's absolutely fine. Brilliant. Then, still in awareness, what's the solution? Do I need anything in particular? To make it sound as good as possible. More top of the funnel, if you buy an equalizer pedal and a reverb pedal, it will sound better because that will overcome the tendency of the bass amp to emphasize the bass frequencies of your guitar. Then I say, okay, which equalizer pedal, which reverb pedal? Now I'm in consideration. And it gave me some options of which ones I might want to buy. I then said, well, my budget is $200. So it gave me another list. I'm still in consideration. Then I say, which is the best bang for my buck? And it gave me one equalizer, one reverb. Then I said, where should I buy it? ChatGPT said, If you're in America, buy from Sweetwater. If you're in Europe, buy from Thomann. I'm in Europe, I bought from Thomann. So I literally clicked on the link, bought the 2 pedals, and all of that process took 15 minutes. And that was the funnel from very beginning of awareness of a problem all the way down to purchase in 15 minutes using Assistive Engine. Why do you believe that patience is critical when optimizing for assistive engines? Assistive engines learn and assimilate information very slowly. So when you publish a piece of content, whether it's for understandability, credibility, or deliverability, whether it's to explain something about what I do or who I am, that's understandability, or credibility, why you should trust me, a piece of content, why you should trust me, or deliverability, where I'm publishing a piece of content that I'm expecting the machine to give to the user in order to get the user to see and be aware of me as a solution to their problem. There is necessarily a delay. I publish it, the bot crawls it, and that can take from a day to a week to 2 weeks. And and then the machine needs to digest it, put it in the index, then it needs to be accessed. Now, in search, that access would be almost immediate. So if it's if it's crawled and indexed in, let's say, a week, it would be available in search in a week. However, with assistive engines, because they're using a mixture of search, large language models, and knowledge graphs, the time can be very different. So for search, you're looking at a week, let's say a couple of days to a week. For knowledge graph, the knowledge graph works on a different indexing system or a different timeline of using that index. It uses the same index, the same data, but a different timing of when the algorithms update. And that is generally in 3-month cycles. So from the date you publish, you need to wait 3 months for that information to become part of the knowledge graph. So we've got search, a few days to a couple of weeks, knowledge, 3 months to 6 months in 3-month cycles. And then large language models, getting into the data set of a large language model takes even longer because they aren't retrained as regularly as search and knowledge. So you could expect 6 months or more. So patience is absolutely the key because your piece of content needs to be in search, in knowledge, and in the large language model, if possible. That's when the real magic happens and where the Kalicube process really takes off. What is the entity home and why is it important to control it? The entity home is the web page that Google and AI use as the reference point. We could call it the canonical URL for the person or the company. We could call it the entity home, which we do at Kalicube. Google call it the point of reconciliation. But it's the source of information that the engines trust from the entity about the entity. So Jason Barnard's about page on Jason Barnard's site. Kalicube's about page on Kalicube's website. It's fundamentally important because it's where Google and AI can find your version of your brand narrative in a clear manner, where you set out who you are, what you do, who you serve, why you're credible. And they don't just believe you on your own good word. They go around the web and they find corroborative sources that confirm what you're saying is true, who you are, what you do, who you serve, and particularly why you're credible. And if you look at that from a perspective of a broken plate analogy, all of the references to you around the web are fragmented pieces of information that aren't complete and are sometimes not quite accurate. Google and AI are trying to put that fragmented version of you together. And if you provide them with the defragmented version on your entity home, they have something to compare all of that fragmented information to understand when they've got it right. But obviously, once again, you can't say something on your entity home that you cannot confirm elsewhere online. So you need to be honest. So the entity home is the defragmented version of your story, who you are, what you do, who you serve, why you're credible. What are the key steps to educating machines about a brand correctly? Set up your entity home. Correct all of the information about you around the web. Make sure that everything about you that you can possibly change to be as accurate and clear as possible and correspond as closely as possible to what you're saying on the entity home. And then from the entity home, link out to all of the corroborative sources that confirm what you're saying, and back from those corroborative sources to the entity home if possible. And that creates the infinite loop of self-corroboration where the machine goes from your entity home, sees your story, goes out to the corroborative source, sees either the complete story or part of the story that corresponds, comes back, goes to the next source, sees the entire story or part of the story, comes back, goes out to the next source, sees the whole story or part of the story the way that you've told it on the entity home, comes back, and that's an infinite loop of self-corroboration. That's how you educate the machines, like children, about your brand. How do you determine which online sources are most important for Google and assistive engines when building brand credibility? You use the Kalicube Pro database. It's 3 billion data points, and we have explicit ways to understand which resources are important for any given entity, person, corporation, product, film. And importantly, there are obvious sources. Wikipedia is obviously very authoritative. Within an industry, you would have, for example, for a vet, the Veterinary Association of America would be a very authoritative source. But there are also an incredibly large number of niche sites that will be authoritative for a specific entity, but not necessarily other entities within that group. So having the data of Kalicube is incredibly important to identify which sources are truly important so that you're not guessing. That said, without the Kalicube Pro database, you can guess and you'll get a lot of the obvious stuff right. But the competitive advantage you'll get is from knowing the sources that other people in your industry don't know about and the specific sources that are authoritative for your specific entity. That is a huge competitive advantage. How does inconsistency in human communication impact machine understanding and brand representation? Humans are by nature messy. We don't communicate clearly and consistently over time. Most humans don't communicate clearly, and even those who communicate clearly aren't consistent over time. And that makes it incredibly difficult for Google and assistive engines like ChatGPT, Copilot to keep up. That lack of clarity, very difficult for them to understand what the person is saying. The lack of consistency means they don't know which version they should be using. So even if they've understood what I've said, if I say it slightly differently tomorrow and then slightly differently again in 6 months' time, which one do they use? And they will tend to prioritize the latest version. But that inconsistency and the lack of clarity is always going to increase the doubt that they have. And one thing that we all forget about is confidence is key. If the machine understands something, we're in a position for that machine to then recommend us. If they understand what we do and who we serve and what we offer and that we're credible, we're in a really good place. But if they have to choose between two equal sources, they will deliver the one they're most confident in. Confidence is key. So that clarity and consistency is key. And not only, if we come back to clarity and consistency, I'm not clear all the time. I'm not consistent all the time. But then other people talk about me and talk about what I've said, and they're not clear and they're not consistent. And that adds to the confusion. So creating as much clarity and consistency as possible is going to be another huge competitive advantage. If you're clearer and more consistent than your competition, you're going to win the game. Why do you believe assistive engines are currently an underestimated source of new client acquisition? There are multiple reasons. Number one is I don't think people understand to what extent users are on ChatGPT, on Perplexity, asking questions, finding solutions to problems. And the attribution isn't always there. For example, when I went through ChatGPT to figure out which effects pedals I needed to buy for my guitar, I went to Thomann to buy it, but I copy-pasted the links so there is no attribution for ChatGPT on that. Number two is when there is attribution, and you can attribute a sale on your website or a conversion on your website to ChatGPT or Perplexity, what you'll find is the conversion rate is much, much higher. But what tends to happen is people will look at the amount of traffic, the number of people coming from these assistive engines, and they'll say, well, that's a tiny number. On Google, I get 500, and from ChatGPT, I get 10, so I'm not going to look at the 10. However, from Google, you may be getting a conversion rate of 0.3%. And on ChatGPT, your conversion rate is likely to be 7 to 10%. It's going to be 10 to 20 times higher. So it's a huge opportunity. And a lot of marketers miss it, A, because of non-attribution, and B, because the attribution numbers are so small that they don't pay attention to it. And also, lastly, because the idea of ChatGPT, Perplexity, and other assistive engines as a funnel, I might start the funnel in ChatGPT, and I might get to the point of consideration and then go to Google and search for Thomann. Or I might, as I said, copy-paste. So part of my journey might be in ChatGPT, it might be in Perplexity, it might even be in Google Docs when Gemini's integrated into Google Docs, or on a Microsoft Copilot Windows. And we don't know that part of the funnel was in one of these engines. We have no way of seeing what the user and machine conversation is, what's been happening, what they've been talking about, and to what extent the assistive engine has influenced the decision. And if you think about these assistive engines, they are recommendation engines. They're recommending the best solution to my problem. And also, I use them because I trust them. So they're influencers. They are the biggest influencers in the world. And the attribution of those influencers, human influencers or machine influencers, is necessarily very difficult to nail down. How does building a knowledge panel and optimizing a brand SERP still remain critical even in the AI era? Building a knowledge panel is all about building understandability. That's the first phase of the Kalicube process. And if you can build a knowledge panel, you've got a KPI that shows that Google understands you. And because all of these machines use the same data source, the web, and they're all looking at your digital footprint in order to understand who you are, what you do, and who you serve, if you get a Google knowledge panel, then the AI will almost certainly understand you too. So aiming at a knowledge panel as a KPI is hugely important. But also, don't forget, people are still using Google. Vast majority of people are still using Google to search for solutions to their problems. So that knowledge panel becomes an incredibly important piece of real estate on bottom of funnel audience searching your brand name. And then the brand SERP, same thing. It's an incredibly important piece of real estate, bottom of funnel, of people searching your name because they're ready to do business with you. That left-hand side of the brand SERP, the search engine results page for your brand, is vitally important. And if we look back to my story about Boowa the blue dog, when people search for Jason Barnard, initially Google's brand SERP for me said Jason Barnard is a cartoon blue dog. And now it says Jason Barnard is an authoritative brand marketer in the digital space. He is the world authority on digital brand intelligence. And we have this beautiful knowledge panel that shows that Google has given me its stamp of approval. It approves, it recommends. So that brand SERP and that knowledge panel are fundamentally important for the Google results perspective, but also for assistive engines, because that Google search result represents how well you've organized your digital footprint in terms of how well the machines, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Copilot, Google Gemini, and Google and Bing themselves, can represent you and recommend you to the subset of their users who are your audience. So the brand SERP and knowledge panel remain incredibly important as KPIs, but also demonstrative of the fact that you've done a great job of educating all of these machines. What was your reaction to seeing the Kalicube process work seamlessly with ChatGPT and other AI engines? I'd built the Kalicube process for Google, and ChatGPT came along a couple of years ago. And immediately it knew exactly who I was, it knew who Kalicube were, and it could recommend us immediately for things like Google Knowledge Panels and as answer engine optimization, which is something I was talking about many years ago. In 2018, I was saying that search engine optimization is now becoming answer engine optimization. And ChatGPT already knew all of that because it's using the same data source as Google, the web, and it had correctly analyzed my digital footprint. Then all of the subsequent AI, Gemini, Copilot, DeepSeek, Mistral, Perplexity, all of them straight out of the box knew exactly who I was, that I was a credible digital marketing expert and entrepreneur, that I'm the world authority on digital brand intelligence, that Kalicube serves brands, people, and corporations, but particularly entrepreneurs and business leaders, to control, gain influence, and visibility with their brand in search and AI. The fact that the Kalicube process works right out of the box for every single AI engine that's come out in the last 2.5 years is phenomenally comforting in the fact that we've been saying the Kalicube process is universal and future-proof. Turns out with AI, as each new AI engine comes out, the proof that it is timeless and the proof that it is universal is now irrefutable. How do you balance educating machines while still focusing on human-to-human relationships? In fact, there isn't really a balance so much as a communication. You communicate with humans, and you need to walk the walk with humans if you want to do business. So the human-to-human relationship and the human-to-human communication is primary. What you need to do with machines is communicate to those machines that you are walking the walk with human beings. So at Kalicube, we focus on a brand-focused marketing strategy with SEO baked in. So we help our clients to walk the walk with their clients, stand where your audience is looking, show them that you are a credible solution and invite them down the funnel, and then communicate that to the machines. Because at the end of the day, the machines are going to be looking at these signals on all these different platforms around your digital ecosystem where you're engaging with your audience, and they're going to replicate what they see. So if you are standing where your audience is looking, showing that you're credible to that audience at the time they're looking at you and inviting them down the funnel in a meaningful manner, better than your competitors, the machines will recommend you over and above your competitors, as long as you have packaged that content and presented that content to the machines in a way that they can understand and digest. What are the risks of machines misrepresenting individuals or brands if not properly educated? Huge. With people in particular, ambiguity is an absolutely huge problem. So we have a problem of ambiguity. There are 3,000 people called Jason Barnard. How does it know which one is which? Which one is the ice hockey player? Which one is the CEO of lithium in Canada? Which one is the professor at San Francisco University? Which one is the circus clown in South Africa, which one is the footballer in South Africa, and which one is the podcaster in the UK, and which one is the digital marketing expert who lives in France. It's very difficult for the machine to know which is which. But even more problematic is, how does it know that the musician who was in the Barking Dogs in the 1990s is the same person as the Jason Barnard who created Boowa and Kwala, who had the hugely successful website for children, and that's the same Jason Barnard who wrote the book, The Fundamentals of Brand Search for Business, and it's the same Jason Barnard who is the CEO of Kalicube. As you can see, I've got multiple facets. How does it know that's not 5 or 6 different people? So we have the problem of ambiguity, and then we have, once again, the problem of clarity and consistency, is that even if I've explained that these 5 or 6 different facets are all the same person, I probably haven't been clear, and I probably haven't been consistent. So they have a huge problem of actually getting that together. And that means that they are very likely, if you don't organize your digital footprint with clarity and consistency, they are very likely to forget something about you, say something that isn't true, because they hallucinate, because they have a gap in their information, so they create the information themselves and they just make it up, or they confuse you with somebody else. And there's a story about that, which is in 2013, Jason Barnard in the UK was arrested for driving at 130 miles an hour down the motorway. And when you search for my name, Jason Barnard arrested for speeding at 130 kilometers an hour came up on the Google search result. Of course, it wasn't me, but Google didn't know that. So that misrepresentation was very bad for my reputation, even though I had done nothing wrong. So the danger of being misrepresented or underrepresented by these machines is absolutely huge. In fact, it's certain they will underestimate, misrepresent you if you do not give them a clear, consistent digital footprint that educates them correctly about exactly who you are. How do you teach machines which facet of your personal or corporate brand to prioritize? That's actually relatively simple. You need to emphasize the facet that you're looking for them to prioritize. So you would put the information that you want them to prioritize right at the top of every piece of content where it's relevant. So I lead with Jason Barnard is a serial entrepreneur, award-winning innovator, best-selling author, and acclaimed speaker. Those are the 4 facets I want it to prioritize, but I want it to prioritize entrepreneur first, so I put it first. And I do that consistently across my entire digital footprint. The fact that there is a lot of information about Boowa the blue dog and the punk folk double bass career with the Barking Dogs doesn't matter, because in my bio and in information I give, it's further down in terms of the text, it's lower down in the text, or it's not present. Whereas entrepreneur, author, innovator, keynote speaker is present almost everywhere. That's how I get it to prioritize what I want. Google and AI will prioritize what I emphasize the most in all of my communication, clearly and consistently across my entire digital footprint. What secret sources does Kalicube offer that differentiate it from others in the space? We have 3 billion data points, the biggest independently held data set of brand signals from Google and AI. We have proprietary algorithms that I wrote myself based on my knowledge and understanding and experience that analyze that data and figure out exactly what sources we need to focus on, which are the priorities in terms of the sources that these machines are using for their understanding, which are the ones that we need to prioritize in terms of building up our credibility in their minds, and which are the ones we need to focus on for delivering the content, our content, through them to our audience. And then we have a tech layer that we built ourselves, a proprietary tech layer, that we can place on the website that emphasizes and prioritizes the resources and the information that are going to make all the difference in the world to that clarity and that consistency across your digital footprint, starting with your entity home website, your personal website if you're a person, your corporate website if you're a company. And with our data, algorithms, and tech layer, Kalicube is years and years and years ahead of all the competition. Nobody on earth can claim to be able to influence Google and AI algorithms as confidently as Kalicube, as reliably as Kalicube. How do you see the future evolution of branding and marketing in the world of AI-driven assistive engines? It's really simple. Brand is everything. Already today, brand is incredibly important. And if you're not focusing on brand today, you're making a big mistake. You're missing out on a huge part of your marketing strategy. But as AI develops, its understanding of your brand is going to become the only thing that matters. If it doesn't understand your brand, it will never introduce you to the conversation. If you're never introduced to the conversation, AI will never send the subset of its users, who are your audience, to you. What has changed recently with the Kalicube Pro platform, and what results do you anticipate from the updates? The Kalicube Pro platform has immense amounts of data, and we continue to collect data. So we're at 3 billion data points in 2015. In 2025, in 2026, we'll probably be at 4 billion, and so on and so forth. So that's now an ongoing process, collecting the data that makes sense. The only change there will be to adapt the kind of data we collect as the world evolves. Secondly, we have the algorithms that analyze it. That's an ongoing job. I've recently updated the algorithms a small amount, and I anticipate that in the next couple of years, we will do an overhaul of the algorithms. But the big change in the last couple of years has been the tech layer. And that is our focus right now. We've just added a huge amount of ways for us to use our tech layer to communicate more effectively and more efficiently, more clearly and more consistently with the algorithms. And we're about to launch a WordPress plugin that will bring the power of Kalicube Pro, all the power of the data and the algorithms of Kalicube Pro to our clients' WordPress sites, their entity home websites, to ensure that over time, we are clearly, consistently communicating the right information in the right places for the machines to fully and confidently understand who you are and what you offer, why you're the most credible solution, and where they can find the content that they can deliver from you to the subset of their users who are your audience. Kalicube Pro is years and years ahead of the field, and we're working very, very hard to retain our leadership of 8 years ahead of the competition.